Usha Vance had never intended to be a symbol. A quiet, brilliant lawyer, mother of 3, and the wife of JD Vance, the rising MAGA senator from Ohio, she had spent much of her life away from the spotlight. But sometimes the world decides for you. It wasn't a speech or a viral post that turned heads. It was a photo, a candid shot of Usha walking into a Senate event, graceful, composed, wearing a simple sari, a red bindi, and streaks of grey in her hair. That image exploded online, and what followed was a firestorm of curiosity, criticism, admiration, and soul-searching. Not because she tried to provoke, but because she didn't. She was simply being herself, unapologetically. Conservative America wasn't sure what to make of her. A woman of Indian descent, a practicing Hindu, a Yale law graduate, and the wife of a man who had become one of the loudest voices in the new populist right. The MAGA base expected a certain mold. A wife who blended in, who echoed the same talking points, who didn't ruffle feathers. But Usha refused to shrink into that shape. When some right-wing voices mocked her bindi or questioned her beliefs, expecting her to go silent or change, she responded not with tweets or interviews, but with dignity. She showed up again and again, smiling, steady, hands folded in namaste at public events. Her silence became a statement, louder than any speech. To many in the movement, Usha's quiet presence forced a reckoning. Could someone who looked different, believed differently, and walked a different cultural path still represent the American dream? The answer, slowly, became undeniable. She wasn't just tolerated, she began to be embraced. Supporters posted photos of their own aging hair with the hashtag #GrayProud, citing Usha's Hindu Americans, long feeling invisible in American politics, saw her as proof that they didn't have to compromise their faith to belong. Mothers praised her courage to age naturally in a world that worships filters and dye. Some conservative women admitted they felt empowered by her quiet rebellion because it reminded them that strength doesn't always shout. The backlash didn't vanish overnight. There were still whispers, still online trolls who said she didn't look First Lady enough or that her sari wasn't American. But something had shifted. Her husband, JD, publicly defended her faith, calling Hinduism one of the world's great religions. And when asked if Usha planned to convert, he looked reporters in the eye and said, "My wife's faith is part of what makes her wise. I would never ask her to change." That moment, just a few seconds on camera, spoke volumes. It wasn't just about religious tolerance, it was about deep respect, the kind that can change minds, the kind that says America isn't one flavor, one face, or one faith. It's all of us, together. At a town hall in rural Ohio, a gray-haired woman named Carol stood up to speak. She'd voted Republican all her life, had never left her hometown, and confessed she didn't know much about Hinduism. "But I saw Usha on TV," she said, her voice cracking. "She reminded me that women can be different and still strong. She reminded me that I don't have to hide who I am anymore." The crowd clapped. Some cried. In that moment, Usha's quiet revolution had reached someone unexpected, not through policy, not through protest, but through presence, through being unafraid to show up exactly as she was. Behind the scenes, Usha continued her work at the law firm. She still packed school lunches, read bedtime stories, and did yoga before dawn. She never sought fame, but she didn't flinch from it either. When invited to speak at a national conference on faith and politics, she accepted. Her message was simple. We don't all have to look the same or believe the same to love this country. What matters is how we treat each other. It wasn't a soundbite. It was her truth. And in a world drowning in noise, her voice, soft, calm, unwavering, cut through like a bell. Her story became something greater than one woman's journey. It stirred conversations about what it means to be American. It encouraged conservative circles to expand their vision of inclusion. It gave daughters permission to be proud of their roots and mothers permission to be proud of their grey. It reminded the country that change doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks in gently, with silver streaks in its hair, faith in its heart, and a fire that refuses to dim. Usha Vance didn't scream her way into history. She simply lived her truth. And in doing so, she broke the mold. Not to tear anything down, but to quietly show us what else could rise. Usha Vance never sought the limelight. In fact, for most of her life, she had chosen to remain quietly in the background, an accomplished attorney, a devoted mother, and the supportive wife of a rising political figure. But sometimes, the world shines its spotlight on those who never ask for it. And when it does, a quiet soul like Usha can either shy away or stand tall and redefine the frame. It all began with a single photograph. Usha, walking beside her husband JD Vance at a public event wearing a simple cream sari with a red border, her grey-streaked hair tied back gracefully and a bindi dot glowing gently on her forehead. She wasn't posing, she wasn't campaigning, she was just being. But that moment, frozen in a picture, ignited something unexpected. The internet exploded, not with applause, but with questions. Who is she? Why is she wearing that? Isn't he MAGA? The comment sections lit up with curiosity, confusion, admiration, and, predictably, criticism. Some mocked her appearance, some questioned her faith. Others couldn't reconcile how a woman of Hindu background and unapologetic Indian heritage was the wife of a populist Republican senator. It didn't fit their narrative. She didn't fit the mold. But Usha wasn't trying to. She didn't speak out in rebuttal. She didn't go on interviews or issue statements. Her response was to continue being herself, calm, elegant, and immovable, like a stone in a river, shaping the current without resistance. Her silence spoke volumes. It said, "I will not bend to your expectations. I will not apologize for who I am. I will not bleach my truth to blend in." And that message began to echo in hearts across the country, especially among women. For so long, American women, particularly women of color, have been told they must choose culture or acceptance, faith or freedom, authenticity or approval. Usha Vance was quietly proving otherwise. Her grey hair, far from being a sign of neglect, became a symbol of defiance in a world obsessed with youth. Her bindi wasn't a strange accessory, it was a sacred mark of identity, devotion, and grace. But the backlash wasn't just about style, it was about discomfort. For many in the conservative movement, Usha's presence forced a difficult question. Can someone outside the traditional mold still represent American values? It was ironic. The movement that prided itself on family values was being challenged by a woman who embodied them. Just not in the way they expected. Devoted wife, hands-on mother, faithful in her spirituality, loyal to her husband's career. But she didn't shout slogans. She didn't perform patriotism in red, white, and blue. She simply lived her truth with reverence and restraint. And in doing so, she made many people pause and look inward. There was a moment that turned the tide. During a town hall, JD Vance was asked by a member of the audience, bluntly, "Does your wife plan to convert?" It was a moment ripe for political evasion, but JD didn't flinch. He smiled gently and said, "My wife's faith is part of what makes her wise. I would never ask her to change." That sentence rippled far beyond the room. It was replayed on television, debated on talk shows, and shared thousands of times on social media. Not because it was controversial, but because it was courageous. It was a husband defending his wife's right to be wholly herself. And in today's political world, where spouses are often props, that authenticity mattered. From that moment on, things shifted. Slowly, quietly, the criticism began to soften. Support began to build, not just from Indian Americans or women, but from unexpected corners. Elderly conservative women began posting selfies with their natural gray hair, tagging them "gray with grace." Hindu Americans wrote op-eds thanking Usha for making space for their faith in the national conversation. Even critics who had questioned her began to admire her restraint. She wasn't reactive, she wasn't defensive. She was simply steady, and in that steadiness people found a kind of strength that felt rare. In a political era defined by noise, Usha Vance was becoming a symbol of stillness. Her children, still young, would one day understand what their mother stood for, not by lectures or activism, but by example. They'd see how she walked through storms with her head held high, how she never raised her voice, yet commanded attention. They'd hear stories of how she refused to dye her hair or hide her faith just to fit a mold. And they'd know that their mother didn't just love her country, she redefined what loving your country can look like. Not through assimilation, but through integration. Not by losing who you are, but by showing that who you are belongs here too.